Good morning, everybody. Welcome on this absolutely beautiful Tuesday, which is really nice. Getting these last couple glimpses of summer. My name is Ethan Borque. I'm a psychotherapist here at Sasko River Center. I have a master's in counseling and currently have my associate's licensed professional counselor licensure. But welcome and thank you for joining us on kind of like the first kickoff event of finding your flow, navigating your family through the ups and downs. This is our first of the parent lecture series for this school year. Um, and we're kind of gonna talk about the main theme that we're getting into through a lot of these talks. There will be some moments during this webinar for you to answer some questions or for me to answer some questions. So during those times, just feel free to put them in the chat rather than unmuting or things like that. With 26 participants, it can get a lot of people speaking at once. So we'll just use the chat for any questions. If you have anything that come to mind during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll try to take some pauses during it to answer them if anything comes up. And then there'll be a lot more time at the end to answer questions for anything that you had about the presentation, or even if, you might have like almost like a real life question or something like that. So next slide, please. Imagine if you could creating moments with your children where you're all so fully immersed, so completely engaged and so full of joy that you and your family literally just lose track of time. You might be 3 hours goes by and you didn't even notice. You end up being late for something because you were all just so focused on having fun and enjoying yourselves doing something. The day just kind of goes by. Next slide. It's all about creating flow. And that's pretty much just when everything simply clicks as a family, as a person. And so hopefully you've had some recent moments like this as a family. It's obviously definitely okay if you have not. That might be why you're joining this presentation. But if you've had any recent moments like this, where were you doing it? What were you all doing during that time? And if you can think of anything or something comes to mind about a time where your family was kind of all flowing together well, feel free to share it in the chat. You don't have to do it with everybody. You can do it just directly to me if you want. And I'll try to bring them up later as some real life examples of families having flow when we talk about that in a few slides. Next slide, please. So the topics and kind of agenda for today is we're going to go into the different types of flow and how we kind of came to this definition of flow, what we're going to be talking about for it as Sasko River Center, and kind of throughout this year what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about flow in our feelings, what disrupts flow in our lives, how to create flow for your family, and then probably one of the more important things are things that you can take home today, things that you can try today and this week with your family if you do feel like you're struggling with it, or even with yourself. We're going to get into how flow is kind of layered, and so you can start at different levels, and we'll get into all of that and give you some concrete things to do to really help yourselves out. Next slide. So let's get started on what we mean exactly by flow. We gave you a little brief example earlier, but thinking metaphorically, we have a picture of a river there. Water is probably the greatest association of flow and what we think about in the natural world. A river navigates its way around rocks, trees, other obstacles, and keeps moving forward to wherever its destination is. Sometimes the current is really strong, and sometimes it just seems like a trickle that you might see in the woods somewhere, but it's all still going towards the same place. Um, in the psychological sense, flow has been talked about a lot, and there's been a lot of studies on this flow state. And it's been concluded that flow is a state of consciousness where one becomes totally focused or immersed in an activity or task at hand, just like what we talked about earlier. You usually have completely full engagement in it, and everything just kind of clicks. In the moment, you may not also recognize that you're in flow. A lot of times when you do, that can actually kind of pull you out of flow because then you start thinking again rather than maybe just reacting. Um, and then in wellness, flow has been talked about a lot, and with yoga as well, with the energy of the body and having flow kind of through one's body. And that talks a lot more about the blockages. And so, similar to the river metaphor, using the trees and the rocks, the wellness aspect of flow talks a lot about those disruptions. And when you have an issue, it's usually because something is being blocked. Something is causing you to have a hard time having that flow, accessing your flow. And so, in the wellness aspect, they talk a lot about how you can relieve those blockages, get around those disruptions to keep powering through. Um, and so, in a combination of everything, um, that's kind of like what we're getting into is you're able to enter this psychological flow as a way to reflect and remember the best times of your life, and things that you enjoy, times that were or are more difficult at times with heavy disruptions. You may have a lot of blockages going on. You may have a lot of things that just make life difficult for you in those times, but we keep trying to get forward and achieve that full flow again. So combining it all, you can attempt to recognize different aspects of your life. Sometimes there's different systems that you may be a part of, and focus on areas you'd like to increase those enjoyment and fulfillment, such as yourself or work, school, home life, your relationships. These are all things that are great things that can make us feel a lot of joy, but can also add a lot of disruptions and impact to how we achieve this flow state. And other people associated in these systems will have their own kind of flow going on, and that can impact yourself. And we'll get back to that in a couple of slides. But first, next slide. It's pretty much as simple as being able to feel flow, being able to feel like you can access this state, is going to give you more enjoyment. It's going to give you better quality of life. And there's different ways that you can access this. You can access it as yourself, and you can access it in those different systems that you're a part of. So, a lot of studies have been done on this for psychology, and it shows that when you're able to achieve this or when you're in it, you have greater focus, you have more creativity and productivity, you have better overall well-being. Your positive emotions are associated with this feeling state of flow, like confidence, feeling content in your life and like everything's going well, happiness, or feeling a lot of pride and honor in things that you're doing. Um, and then some examples of things that you might do as a family, could be, maybe let's say there's a fun board night game, or board game night where everybody's very actively involved, nobody's kind of sitting back looking at your phone, um, and the hours just kind of go by. You're so involved in this game, people are laughing, you're creating these fun memories, and then sometimes those build into traditions that happen, and every Friday night game night once a week, things like that. I know growing up, it could have been, for me, like I remember carving pumpkins was always like a very big night, and that's coming up probably in the next month for a lot of families that celebrate Halloween. But that can be a great moment of flow where, people are actively involved in things, you're having fun, the rules get a little bit looser, and everybody just enjoys those times and those moments. And if you feel like you're struggling with that as a self or as a family, then it's important to try to lean into those activities. And again, we'll get back to those a little bit later. But flow can also be a little bit more individual. It can be if you have a family calendar set up, everybody gets where they need to be happy and on time. That can be kind of like a state of flow because everything's just moving well together. Or maybe after school, everybody is running their own schedules kind of independently, but your house is in this state of flow. People are reading, doing homework, cooking dinner, playing outside. Everything's being taken care of as it should, and everybody's just kind of doing their own thing, but in this, well-rounded house. Next slide. But unfortunately, in today's society, and in 2024, we have huge disruptions to our flow that seems every year, every month to be building more and more and more things that try to pull us out of this flow state or just make it harder to get in. So when you're feeling out of flow, when you have this struggle of, I haven't gone into this flow state in a while, you're going to feel overwhelmed a lot. You're going to feel like you don't have control over yourself. And you're just out of control on a lot of things. You might have a shorter fuse, as I like to call it, with a lot of my clients and people I talk with, where you're going to be quick to react to things and you might recognize it, but it doesn't seem like you know what to do about it. You're like, wow, like, yeah, it was a very small thing and I blew up over that. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't have, but I don't know why I did. And then other things like sadness, depression, anxiety, and stress can also be associated with feeling out of this state of flow. And that's really tough because both those things also influence our ability to get into that flow state. So if you or somebody in your family is struggling with some of these mental health struggles, also ADHD, OCD, self-confidence issues, maybe there's a learning disability, those are all going to impact your own individual ability to find this flow state and to get into these, happy, prideful emotions that we talked about on the last slide. And other things that are going to impact your ability to get into that are things like bullying, the friendships and connections that you have. Um, all those are going to impact how well somebody can access this state. And so a lot of this is about awareness. And if you can be aware of yourself that, oh, my connections aren't that strong and I don't feel that tied to people, you know that that might be something for you to work on to help yourself, access this more enjoyment and better quality of life that could be associated with flow. And then as I had said, systemic disruptions and difficulties often impact flow as well. It's not just stuff from the self. So, in school, as you might see with your kids, there's a lot that you're constantly asked to do and pulled to do. And it can be a very uncomfortable environment because of testing and exams. There can be social struggles. Your ability to understand the material that you're asked, homework that you have to do, sports and other extracurricular activities that people do. Kids are pulled in all these different directions, and those cause a lot of disruption if you have anything else that makes it difficult for you to access this flow. And so you might see it in your own kids, and I see it in a lot of my clients where they get home from school and they need 15-20 minutes. They might need more, they might need an hour to just go outside and to just try to like get all that stress from the day. That's all that stuff that's adding to them where they've just been out of sync, felt out of control the entire day, and they're just trying to do anything to get back into control and back into this ability to access flow. But then also family and home life sometimes is really difficult, as we know. And sometimes if a child works or if parents work can also make those disruptions difficult. Parents can have meetings really late. Um, but throughout this year, a lot of our other parent lecture series topics are going to focus more specifically on a lot of these common disruptors. So, just a quick plug for upcoming months. We're going to be talking about things like anxiety and fear, big world issues, holiday stress, relationships, overloaded schedules, testing and exams, transitions, perfectionistic tendencies. So, even though this is more of a broad general one, we're still going to get into things that you can do if, make sure that you tune into those other topics as well, because they're going to go more specifically and more into detail for what you might be able to do. Next slide. And then lastly, before we get into kind of what you can do, we're going to get a lot more psychological for a quick second. And I know this might be like a lot, but I think it explains things really well. So this is the model of ecological systems theory, which basically means that an individual's development is greatly impacted and influenced by all the multiple systems that it interacts with. But the key thing here is that it starts with the center and it starts with that individual in the self. And then as we grow up, and even when we're adults, we're constantly impacted by that next layer. So you might have work, school, friends, family, neighbors, all those things impact how the individual self is able to be, how you're able to access flow. That next layer is the mesosystem, and that's how those things interact. So let's say family and school. I know that not all families in schools see eye to eye, and sometimes children can really feel that. And so those are going to impact that kid's ability or thoughts also to access flow in school or access flow at home if those things aren't seeing eye to eye, and then you can keep going from layer to layer. And the importance of this, as you go to the next slide, is that we really need to start with that individual approach. And it's probably one of the hardest things to do, but I like to reference this a lot with some of my clients or parents or people that I work with, because I think it's also really important that sometimes we need to remember to put our own oxygen mask on before assisting others. It's really hard because a lot of times we are much, much better to help other people than we are to help ourselves. That's a very key part of parenting, is helping your child and supporting them and putting a lot of your needs aside. However, if we remember that model from the last slide, you're not going to be able to help those other things if you can't help yourself or the individual first. Um, being a therapist, a key part of that is obviously a helping profession. And a lot of other helping professions know that if you aren't good yourself and you need to check in on that, then you're not going to be able to fully show up for your clients consistently or as they may need it. And so you have to do things for yourself as well. And then we're going to work on that first and then build to those outer layers. So if at your core you're not feeling good on a daily basis, that is the best place to start. And then once you have yourself in control, you're feeling better, you're feeling like you can access some of this flow, then you can take on those outer layers of, how can we get our family more in flow? How can we get work more in flow? Or those different aspects that are also controlling you and making it difficult for you. Next slide. So, 4 things that you can do today. Set clear goals. That's a huge aspect. You want to know what you can achieve. You want to see the path unfold. It's really big and vague a lot of times. So try to break it down. Sometimes you can start with this overarching goal of, I want to feel better. I want to feel like more harmony. I want to feel whatever, but what does that mean? And you have to really define that. Help yourself eliminate distractions, working to create focused environments, do things like that. And then also don't get things that are too challenging or not challenging enough for you, or for whoever you're trying to help achieve this, and then try to stay present if you can. So sometimes setting strong boundaries for yourself are really helpful. Think about, again, if we're trying to help you and the individual self first, how can you advocate to others around you for what you may need? It's one, very okay to show vulnerability. That's a really big thing that Brene Brown preaches a lot, is showing vulnerability. And if you show it to your kids, a lot of times then they'll show the same. And that can be really important. It can help start communication and allow your kids to feel like they can open up to you and they can advocate that they're feeling overwhelmed and they might just need a easy night. If you feel like you can do that as well. Sometimes use a timer. Um, Funny enough, this is something that my mom did a lot just for herself. Um, Maybe, I remember being in middle school or high school coming home, and maybe my mom had a really busy day and she is like, hey, I'm going to go take a nap for 45 minutes. And she would set the oven timer for herself to wake up. However, that was also something for me to be like, cool, I'm not going to go bother my mom for 45 minutes. I'm going to go do what I need to do. Or maybe I'm going to go try to play outside, but I can't ask her or bother her for 45 minutes. So try to do that with your family if you feel like you need to really set boundaries and create time for yourself. Maybe it's just to go on a walk or a run, time to read a book without distractions, or if you're tired, to take a nap or just lay down for a little bit if you need that. Um, but communicating it with others um, is going to be really helpful. And a lot of times we think that we can't do that with kids, or it's hard to do that to our kids, but it's important to do that because they learn from modeling. And so if you do that to them and don't just constantly push yourself, then they're going to learn that they can do that as well and not just push themselves past all these boundaries. Um, it's also important to take time for reflection and pause. As I said earlier, building awareness is really big, and that can help your communication skills. So all these things can really help you as an individual. And if you know and understand how to help yourself, you are going to be better able to help your child or another family member with these same things. If you have things that you do, you can help them set clear goals. You can help them eliminate distractions, or how to figure out if something is too easy or too difficult for them. And that's kind of causing them to lose focus. Or how they can just try to stay present more. Putting the phones down is really difficult, and it's difficult for myself too, but it helps. Okay, next slide. Um, so these are from the book Flow. Um, you can look it up. I'm not going to try and pronounce this author's last name, but it is the 8 elements of enjoyment. And this was kind of one of the things that I found best from this book, or most helpful. It's the 8 components of most positive experiences. So people who reported for this study feeling some sort of state of flow or positive experiences are usually able to name at least one of these things that were associated with it. Confronting tasks that you have a chance of completing, being able to focus on what you're doing, the task that we're working on might have clear goals. Providing immediate feedback is also important. And that's why a lot of times when you access these flow states, they're going to give you one of these things. So if earlier you were able to think of something where either you or your family accessed this state of, losing out on time and being so full of enjoyment, it probably had one of these things. But I think this is a really important slide because you can take this to create more of those. And so you can look at it and think what ideas come up for activities that you can do as a family, um, or that you can do as yourself if you feel like you need to do something and help yourself achieve that quality of life or enjoyment. Um, so that's really important, is these 8 elements of enjoyment. Next slide. So now we're going to go to strategies for your family's flow. Now that we've worked on yourself as an individual, here's some things that you can do to try to help your family. And the first one is really, really hard, but it's practicing relinquishing total control. And that is something that I think I see a lot as a psychotherapist working with a lot of kids, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues do as well. It's really difficult though, and I talk a lot of parents through it, and you have to give them reassurance that, to try to do it. But very similar to working in a group or being part of a team, you have to trust that the other individual parts of the system are working and doing what they're supposed to do. When that happens, a team will create and operate in their own flow state, whether they're all doing their own thing or whether you're all working together. But there's definitely ways that you can help yourself to relinquish control as well, to build your own trust in your kids that you can trust them to go do something. You can establish it by using communications and routines. You can use charts, calendars to help everybody stay organized and in order. So that way, maybe that reassures you like, okay, they're going to go home and look at the chart, see what they need to do, and I'm going to trust them that they get this done. And communicating it is that you're going to tell them that. And then if not, they know that they're going to have to do that later. Um, Sometimes you need to start small. Sometimes just like allowing a child to stay home for the first time, or as I found, leaving your dog out of the crate alone for the first time. You start with like 15 minutes or even smaller just to help them feel good, but it also helps yourself feel good. And then you build up to 30 minutes, and then an hour, and then a little bit longer. And you need to build up that trust, however you can. Basic communication is also really important. Sharing appreciation for other people, allowing vulnerabilities, and for yourself to express your own vulnerabilities. And almost most importantly, you want to validate. You want to validate what people are feeling. If your kid is, they mess up their language a lot. So they might say a feeling and it might not, you might know it's not true, but you can help them explore that by saying things like, what do you mean by that? Like, or I can understand that that was really upsetting, or that would make me angry as well. Um, but that can be really vital in helping everybody understand what other people are feeling and what they wish they could improve to feel better themselves. Um, no consequence time. This is something that is, I think, really, really helpful. I think it's something a lot of people probably already practice, but I kind of try to put like a big name to it so that way a kid can advocate for themselves. They can say, can I have no consequence time? Which basically means there you can set a timer again for 5, 10, 15 minutes to start, but then after you kind of have done it a while, you might not need the timer. But basically, you give your child time um, to vent about whatever is on their mind or bothering them without consequences. And what that means is that they're not going to have to worry about getting in trouble if they want to say that their sibling is annoying them a lot. Um, if they want to say that their teacher is really bothering them or they're having trouble at school. A lot of times, children and adults will withhold being open because of this irrational worry of getting in trouble. We don't want to feel like tattletales. We don't want to rat somebody out. However, so then we just hold it in. But giving this no consequence time means that your child can feel comfortable sharing these things that might be about a sibling or something big that they're struggling with themselves without having this worry of getting in trouble. The first couple times it might be a little awkward because they're not used to it, but the more times it goes, they can advocate of like, hey, I have something on my mind. I could really use 5 minutes of no consequence time to just kind of like say what's going on. Um, and that can be really helpful for opening up. Also, brainstorming as a family that can be used for figuring out if there's problems going on or possibly how to solve problems that you may all feel are going on. Um, if you show a willingness to try and compromise, your child can usually reciprocate that own same willingness. Sometimes it's hard to get the words out of our head, though. And so it can be helpful to write things down in a brainstorm for yourself or for kids, whether it's blank pieces of paper, whiteboards, it can be drawings, and then have the child try to communicate what's going on in the drawing. All those things can be very, very helpful to figure out what's feeling like a problem and how to get back on track. Um, you also want to work maybe on establishing understanding, working on that. If your child might have something like ADHD, anxiety, or depression, you can read all the books in the world and see what that means, but you can also work on having your child actually explain what that means, whether that's again through words or pictures or whatever means possible. Helping you understand what their difficulties are with anxiety, because everybody might be a little bit different with it, or they might have certain things that trigger them more. Um, and how that makes their life a little bit more difficult can be helpful. And once they reach an appropriate age, you can do the same for them too if you struggle with those things as well. And by you doing that, again, is going to model for them that they can be open about that too, and talking about their struggles. Um, and then also understand that kids a lot of times have changing interests, and sometimes it happens really quickly and it's really hard to keep track of. But just try to show support sometimes the best that you can. Sometimes you have kids in elementary school that try to have interests of high schoolers, and that can be really difficult, but try to show that support as best you can, in helping them build their own identity. And then again, with active listening and focusing, I feel like you all can assume things like putting phones away. Again, kids a lot of times model our own behavior. And so if they notice that parents are in meetings a lot, if they have busy parents, then they might end up modeling those things too by also like wanting to just talk to their friends a lot on the phone or things like that, because sometimes that's what they see at home. And it's hard. I do it a lot too. And I have to try to remind myself to be more present. But that's one of the biggest disruptions of 2024 and where we are in this world. And it seems like it's only going to get worse. We're not kind of going back to the 90s at all. So it's only going to get harder. And so it's important that we practice those things. Um, but also sometimes you can let your kids or other families know that, hey, like you can say, like, cue us in. Do you want an active like listening? Do you want your kid to actively listen to you? Sometimes you can ask the other person, do you want feedback or do you just want somebody to listen? Because then that can be really hard and helpful as well. And then you can use that previous slide about the 8 things of enjoyment to build times as families, build activities, what's going to help you all feel better and things like that. Okay, next slide. So now, um, almost lastly, navigating some downs. So right now, transitions are in full bloom if you have kids. The new school year brings a lot of things. New can be scary, new can be difficult, new can be exciting, and new can be uncomfortable. New is a whole bunch of mixed emotions that you need to try and navigate through. Your kid is trying to adapt and change to sometimes just new teachers, sometimes it's a whole new school building, it's new friends and classes. sometimes if you've moved, it could be everything is totally new. And that usually means it's time for a lot of really difficult parenting because your kid's going to be excited one day, but then mad the next day almost about the same exact thing. But here's what you can do to kind of try to help the household establish flow during this difficult transition time. Um, as early as you can, try to establish routines that can be stuck with. Either a morning, after school, or nighttime routine. When a person or especially a child has an expectation of what will happen in mind, they can kind of be put at ease. If your kids are much younger, you might need to write them down, can be very important. And if they're much younger, you might want to laminate them in almost like a checklist that they go through every single day while they're establishing this new before school routine, nighttime routine, after school. But if you look and if you see like, oh yeah, like every morning is really difficult, try to really itemize that out and set expectations and go through it with your child of what those mornings should look like, what needs to happen. I've used everything with from laminated checklists to just post-it notes with clients, students from when I worked in schools, and then also just with myself. And a lot of times those can be easy to just help yourself get on track and get through without feeling maybe overwhelmed or things like that. Um, Similarly, using a whole family calendar can be very helpful and putting it in a spot where everybody can see it. Um, People that have multiple children and very different schedules are going to be all over the place. But it can help people to know what's going on, give them time to alter expectations in advance. If they know that they have soccer on Tuesdays, then sometimes the whole day at school they're thinking, oh, when I go home I'm going to do this and I can't wait. And then you might think, well, they love going to soccer, but they end up throwing a tantrum, or they say, I don't want to go. And sometimes it's just because the whole day they didn't know that were going to soccer. And so they thought that they were going to go try to do something else, whether it was just reading a book or going to play something outside. Um, and then they have to, in the moment, alter their expectations. And that's where that temper tantrum often comes from, is it's too much for them to alter at that time. So giving them a heads up in advance with a big family calendar, whether it's just week to week or a whole month, that can be really helpful. Whether it's after school activities, plans for the weekends, or a vacation coming up. Even if it's something like there's a babysitter coming and the parents or guardians are going on a date night, the kid can know, I'm not going to ask to have a sleepover that night because there's a babysitter coming on the weekend. And so I know not to do those things. And so you can use the previously mentioned and worked on communication strategies to try to come together and also reflect as a family on what's working, what's not working. Don't do it every day. That can be a lot. You want to give it time to adjust. So maybe a week or every 2 weeks, see how these things are working. See if they feel like they need things written out still. Or if they know their schedule for school, if they know what they need to do before school. It's also really good to help bring your kids into that conversation and see what they would change about their morning routine or their nighttime routine. They may say, I feel so stressed by the time I get home from school that I need time. I can't do homework right away. I need time to help find this flow state or just to help feel a little bit better. And those things are going to be really important. The order of the things could be really important to those kids of just getting everything done. Next slide. And so if you're interested, some future or further reading that you can do. The first one is that book Flow that I referenced earlier with the 8 moments of enjoyment, but it is a bit of an older book. I believe it's from like 1990. And so if you do read it, some of the contexts are going to be a little bit outdated. However, it is also a very dense read, I should preface. But there are some great notes about flow, how to establish it in your own life, the importance that it can play in your lives. And there are great things in it still, just like the 8 components of positive experiences I referenced earlier. But just know that it is an older book and pretty dense. So it can be kind of tough getting into. It's also not available as an audiobook yet. I think it's supposed to be by the end of the year, but at the moment it's not. How to talk so kids will listen and listen so kids will talk is really, really wonderful in building those communication strategies. It's a wonderful how-to guide to help make simple changes in communication and how communication happens at home. If you feel stuck with your child or even adults, I found it pretty helpful with some of those things as well in getting them to just listen to you, sometimes following directions, how to open up, feel respected, or just want to understand communication better. I think that this is a really wonderful book that I found very helpful. And it is also available as an audiobook, which is how I listened to it. Um, and also Breaking Free from Childhood Anxiety and OCD is from Yale's SPACE program, which stands for Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions. The founder, Eli Leibovitz, wrote this book. And it goes hand in hand with their program. It is an absolutely wonderful resource for all parents, even if your child doesn't have anxiety or OCD. I found it to talk a lot about behaviors that many children exhibit and how you can kind of best parent and support them through those tougher times. And it's also available on an audiobook. And then in some of the vulnerability things, I also found that Brene Brown is very, very helpful to understand some of your own awareness, working on your individual self, um, feeling okay with being vulnerable, how to be better leaders, which you as parents are the leaders of your household. And so it's totally okay to work on those skills and things like that. Next slide. So now if there's any questions, we have like 13 minutes, so feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want, you can unmute yourself, or maybe there's a raise your hand feature, so that way we don't have a bunch of people raising at once. But that's all for today. So thank you so much. And again, I'll be on here, so if there's any questions, feel free to ask, or you can email me at bourque@sascoriver.com. And that is where you can reach me to ask any questions, or you can always just email Sasko River Center. I believe it's just hello@sascorivercenter.com. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, and I hope that you got some stuff out of it that can be helpful.
Can I just ask a question about effective communication and the listening and how you teach that, either to a
Yeah,
teenager or to an adult who probably has some of those habits of not being an effective listener?
yeah, of course. Um, So I think some of it, like you might have to really start slow. I know teenagers, I know throughout time have always rebelled and gone against everything that their parents say. And I think they're probably going to be the hardest ones that find flow because they actively cause you to also not find flow in your family. A lot of times we see them as the problem. So um, I think, the easiest ones are trying to, again, really try to advocate for them of like having their phone down, trying to teach them those active listening skills of like eyes on. A lot of times I know kids will have their earpods in or AirPods in like the entire day, it seems like. And they're like, no, 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 I'm listening. I'm listening. Um, and it goes into they all feel like they can multitask like the best professionals in the world. And they can be listening to music and then watching a video and listening to what you're saying. And sometimes you need to really like sit down and just be like, this is important and I need you to respond to me. Strategies that we used to tell teachers a lot when I worked in an elementary school was like, it's okay to like go up and be like, hey, like eyes, and can you repeat back to me what the directions were? And so a lot of times some of those elementary kids with ADHD that they'll be looking at you, but their brain is in so many different places. They don't hear either what the tasks or directions are, or kind of like they don't hear what the material is. And that's the more important part because they're trying to learn. And so you can go up and say, like, hey, can you repeat back to me what I just said? Can you repeat back to me what this is? And a lot of times it can be confrontational because the teenager will probably be like, I heard you, ugh, but like you can explain like, hey, like I just want to make sure, like I'm trying to help. I want to make sure that I can trust you. And so if you repeat back to me what I said, what I asked you to do, I'll trust you that I can hear you better. And then sometimes they'll still respond positively and sometimes not. But I know there's been things where parents will literally be like if they're playing video games, which I actually asked some of my clients, it actually makes them enter this flow state. And so that's why a lot of times you get a lot of tantrums or bad behavior leaving video games or having to put the iPad down or the phone because it's what allows them to access this state of like not thinking about anything else. And so sometimes you just need to like grab their shoulders and be like, not shake them, but be like, I need you to hear me right now. Like, hey, you have 5 more minutes, and then I really need you to do this. Sometimes I've had strategies that I've used with parents. I don't have any near me, but writing on a post-it note and just being like, hey, this is for you, and then have them like read it because it's going to take their focus to actually read something away from those other things that they're doing. And then you can say like, hey, can you read this to me? Because then sometimes that helps better. And
Mhm.
then sometimes it gets them on board too, because if you have them read it to you, if you have them repeat what they heard to you, then they know that, okay, now I'm accountable. And you can kind of teach that accountability aspect then of like, yes, I heard that I need to do my chores. I need to go take out the trash in the next 5 minutes. Then you're like, great. So now you know if you don't do it in the next 5 minutes, there's going to be a consequence and you can't throw a tantrum because I know that you heard me and we're all on the same page. Um, so that's a lot, but those are quickly just kind of some things that I usually try to do to help parents or things like that with communication. One of the questions in the chat was, how do you handle when each of your children's needs disrupts the other? For example, one child needs quiet to relax, the other needs to scream to find their center. That's also really difficult. And that's, sometimes finding that individual approach is so important, is that you can't do something that helps everybody out. So if you do have a big enough house that you can have different parts of the house for that, if you're lucky enough to have that, I know not everybody is, but if your kids have different rooms, that can be really important. Also, sometimes setting up for the one that needs quiet time and to relax, even if it's not their room, you can set up a special spot that is a calm down corner is something that we used a lot in schools. And I've had a lot of parents make at home for some of those kids that really just need quiet and peace to help block out almost like how loud their brain is. And so you can work with them to build that. What would they like in it? Maybe it's fuzzy blankets, maybe it's crayons and paper, but giving your, one child the space that they can go do that, where they can be trusted again to go do that well. And then if another one needs that opposite of screaming, or getting it out. Sometimes it's getting all that energy out, running around, doing jumping jacks. Sometimes you can have them do a lot of those physical activities because they're going to be looking for the release. If they need to scream, they're going to be looking for anything that's going to help them release their emotions. So, again, setting them up and almost like whether it's their own space, but talking about it with them and be like, hey, like, are there things that you wish that you could do at home? If you have a garage, would you want to go scream in the garage? And then maybe just let your neighbors know, like, hey, my kid, this is something that they need to do. And if it's too loud, then yeah, try to see like, hey, let's come up with, your release plan that involves maybe doing jumping jacks. I had a parent that one time literally had their kid run 10 laps around the house when he felt like he needed it. But it really, really helped because they just got everything out and they felt so much better afterwards. And so for the loud kids that need that release, you can always lean into those other activities that are going to provide release. As long as it's the right time of day that you can do that. Obviously, nighttime can be a lot harder, but that's when you can try to find something quieter, because we want to build up skills. I think one of the most important things is to build up not just a plan A, but a plan B, a plan C. So that way, depending on the time of day, your child feels like they can do other things if the first option isn't available, and they can rely that it'll work. Um, so similarly, working with teens that might need tutoring in math, or just tutoring in general because they might be at risk of failing. And if they refuse help, teens are really, really hard. You almost have to really trick teens, and you have to try to make it think like it's their idea. Teens, and oftentimes I think they refuse help tutoring because they sometimes it's that they want to do it on their own. That's why they refuse any help at all. Uh, and so it's difficult. You have to get them that support, but you almost have to trick them into wanting it and understanding why it would be important for them to do it. Grades are obviously really important, but sometimes you have to work on that motivation piece first and trying to talk to them, trying to ask them like why they're not motivated. Something that you can also try to do is explain to them why it's important to you, and then ask them what about it isn't important, and really help them see that you understand that this is important to you, but you want to make it important to them as well, and you notice that it's not. And so how can we work on that first? And sometimes teens will hear that and be like, oh, they are listening to me, and just trying to figure out like, well, if you want to do it on your own, what can you do on your own? Let's try that out first. But if not, then I really want to get a tutor for math. We don't have to, what are you afraid of losing by having a tutor for math? Or maybe it's just that math is so difficult for them to get through that um, they need the thought of doing more math work to them is awful, because the entire day their whole, you know they just struggle with it in every aspect. So I would say try to say why it's important to you, and then try to have them explain why they don't see it as important, or why, but don't sometimes bring the grades into it, because that can add a lot of pressure. And sometimes they know that they're at risk of failing, um, and so it can only add more stress to them sometimes, and kind of make things go backwards and refuse the help actually. Another question, how long or how do you best help a kid who internalizes their stress and doesn't admit they are worried about anything and then end up ill. That is very difficult because sometimes stress does have that effect, as we know. Stress can make you feel sick, can make you feel stomach aches. I feel like I have a couple clients that do this same exact thing. The parents will always tell me, like, oh, yeah, like every morning they have these stomach aches before school. We know that school makes them anxious, but the kid will never admit that the two are related. They're like, no, I just get these stomach aches and stuff like that. Um, it's really difficult. You want to just help them open up as best you can. Sometimes it starts depending on their age, again, with admitting your stress. And sometimes it's saying, validating their feelings before you even know that they have it, or without them even communicating it. So if you can tell that they're stressed, you can say, but they're not going to admit, they're like, no, I'm fine, I'm fine. You can say, like, oh, I bet you're fine, but I can understand if you were stressed because that would probably stress me out if I had to go through that. So, sometimes that can be really helpful. If they're younger, like before even third grade, a lot of it is just working on, I think, their knowledge of emotions. And so sometimes it can be doing things like how to help them communicate those emotions better. And sometimes it's not even using words. And so with some clients that are younger, I've had them, we've drawn a bunch of emoji pictures, or we find emojis online that represent a bunch of different emotions. I also have a great poster in my office that has a whole bunch of different emotions. And you can use that to help them express themselves, because that can be a more comfortable way of doing it that isn't just saying, I feel stressed, I feel anxious. And sometimes even for older kids too, it's a more comfortable thing to just be like, hey, can you just point or just tell me what you're feeling? Because there usually isn't an emoji that says I'm fine. And they're not going to put happy because they know they're not happy. But you can be like, we don't have to talk about it. Those ones that internalize can be a lot tougher because they don't want to talk about it. And they're going to be a little bit more stubborn with that. But if you give them those tools to just say what they're feeling, and then give them that space to be like, if you want to talk about it, you can. If you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to, but I just want to know what you're feeling so I can understand you better. And that can be kind of sometimes a good place to start, and then know that it's going to take time. But then after a while, it will build up, especially if you use those emojis, if you use those other tools. Eventually, they'll just start opening up about things. And the book, that book that I had referenced, the How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk, that gives a lot of examples as well. As being a how-to guide, it gives a lot of real life examples that they got from completing all their studies and things like that about and making the book, of how to help those internalizers open up a little bit better or easier, at all different ages. Um, you're welcome, Beatrice. Okay. Are there? Oh, okay. What is the optimal timing to help facilitate flow state to help create support to navigate the challenges of non-preferred tasks? Is there a grace period needed to exit the flow state and re-enter into reality? So I think for neurodivergence has become a very big word lately, and for everybody, sometimes it's hard doing those non-preferred tasks and also the exiting of the flow state. Um, Sometimes it's really helping with those executive functioning skills for them, and so it's giving them a little bit of a heads up can be really helpful, knowing what they're going to do next. So whether it's a 5-minute warning for exiting, um, the flow and being like, hey, I need you to take a pause and then do this, but then right after you can do it. The best way is honestly practice. And I think we get a lot of just natural practice in our life. And that's why as we get older into adults, we tend to become better at it. However, we can still very much struggle with it. And so sometimes, it can be setting things up that are good. If you know it's a non-preferred task, and the challenges around that, what can make it not, it's not going to become a preferred task, but can they bring something with them to make it a preferred task? I know doing chores is always very difficult. I know one of the biggest go-tos for doing non-preferred tasks is usually some sort of behavioral chart. um, Getting stickers, getting check marks for completing things. And basically it doesn't make it a preferred task, but it gives them something to know that, hey, when I do all this stuff, I will get something at the end. So it's actually finding motivation for them to do these non-preferred tasks. Um, and so a lot of times giving them a lot of praise around it, giving them a lot of support, again, depending on their age and using it age appropriately. If it's really a struggle, then sometimes using, again, like a reward or behavior chart. I mean, even looking at this to-do list that's on my desk, it literally has a little reward chart for drinking water and hydrating. So, like, even as adults, sometimes we forget to do things, and using a behavioral chart, it seems really trivial. It's a lot to keep up with, and it's a commitment. But if you do it correctly, and if you talk to your child and you find something that's motivating, of like, okay, um, sometimes they're motivated just to actually check off an item and to be like, hey, I completed this, I did it. And then sometimes if it's non-preferred tasks, again, depending on their age, have conversations about it. Be like, hey, like, what about that do you not like to do? What about taking out the trash do you not like to do? And a lot of times it might be like, well, it's actually not about taking out the trash. It's that I find the garage kind of scary and I don't like going into the garage and it triggers me. And I think about all these, what ifs and bad thoughts. And it's like, oh, so what if we just what if we did this? Or like, what if I gave you a flashlight to go do? It's like, yeah, that would solve everything. Or sometimes you can ask them, like, what would make these non-preferred chores or tasks easier? Again, sometimes with the homework, I hear from a lot of clients, they had such a difficult time just getting through the day and trying to focus, that doing more work after school is just another taxing thing, and they're just looking for this reprieve. And so building in their schedule, okay, what can you do to enter this flow? What can you do to de-stress, or de-stress yourself from the day? Running around, reading a book, if you allow screen time, a TV show or a video game. But you can limit it. If they're into sports games, you can play one game, of this sports game. So you know that it has a specific time limit. If it's a TV show, you can watch one episode or two episodes. You can eat a snack, you can come down from the day. And then after those two episodes are up, then it's going to be homework time. And so it gives them kind of like a concrete time frame, um, to be able to get that done as well. And then that can be helpful to give them that flow state before having to exit it. And again, they have an expectation. So it's not like, sometimes it's hard because if they play Minecraft, it doesn't have specific time limits. And so for that, you might utilize timers. Timers can 100% be your best friend, whether it's you have 45 minutes from when you get home, or hey, 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock is homework time. And whether you actually have homework to do to fill that space, or if you finish it in 15 minutes, the next 45 minutes is going to be reading. It's not like once you finish it, you get to go back to work. So um, hopefully that answers that. So if you have any other questions, again, you can feel free to email me at eborque, my last name, at saskariver.com, or you can always email Sasko River themselves. I think it's hello@saskariver.com. But again, thank you all for attending. Thank you for asking questions at the end. And I hope, again, that you all got something out of it. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your Tuesday.